I thought my parents were enjoying a peaceful retirement until I saw an Instagram post that made my stomach turn. When I drove by their house, my suspicions were confirmed. My brother had moved in, and my parents were sleeping on cots in the freezing garage. He was throwing a dinner party inside, bragging about his new estate. I didn't scream. I simply used his own arrogance to legally dismantle his life. If you work in high-end residential construction like I do, you learn to trust your gut. When a load-bearing beam looks slightly off, or a contractor is sweating a little too much during a walkthrough, you don't ignore it. You investigate. That instinct is what has made me one of the most requested project managers in the tri-state area at just 34 years old. It's also what told me something was terribly wrong with my parents. It started with a digital red flag at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my truck, a muddy Ford F-150 that doubled as my mobile office, eating a lukewarm turkey sandwich between site visits. I opened Instagram to mindlessly scroll for a few minutes and saw a story posted by my sister-in-law, Emery. Emery was the type of person who curated her life to look like a magazine spread, even if she was drowning in credit card debt. The photo showed a manicured hand holding a glass of expensive champagne, Veuve Clicquot, specifically, against the backdrop of a very familiar bay window. The caption read, "Finally settled into the new forever home, blessed new beginnings estate life." I squinted at the screen. That wasn't just any bay window. That was the custom oak trim my father, Arthur, had installed with his own hands in 1998. That was my parents' living room. I called my mom immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I called my dad. It rang 4 times before disconnecting. My parents, Arthur and Maureen, were in their early 70s. They were gentle, non-confrontational people who had spent their lives saving for a quiet retirement. They had mentioned Brendan, my older brother, was staying for a few days while he looked for a new apartment, but settled into the forever home sounded like a permanent occupation. Brendan was 36, 2 years older than me, but possessed the maturity of a sophomore in college. He was a serial entrepreneur, which is just a polite way of saying he was unemployed and had a history of losing other people's money. I tossed the rest of my sandwich into the wrapper, started the engine, and canceled my afternoon site inspection. The job site was 40 minutes away from my parents' house, but I made it in 30. As I turned onto Elm Street, the first thing I noticed was the lack of my parents' sedan. Their sensible 2018 Toyota Camry was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the driveway was dominated by Brendan's leased BMW X5 and Emery's white Range Rover. Parked behind them was a flashy yellow Corvette I didn't recognize. The lawn, usually my dad's pride and joy, looked neglected. The grass was overgrown, and someone had parked the Range Rover with one wheel crushing the hydration lines of the sprinkler system I had installed for them last summer. I pulled my truck up to the curb, grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, force of habit, and walked up the driveway. The house looked normal from the outside, but the vibe was off. Music was thumping from inside. It wasn't loud enough to be a disturbance, but it was loud enough to drown out the doorbell. I didn't ring it, I had a key. But as I reached for the front door, something caught my eye. The side door to the detached garage was slightly ajar. A thin extension cord ran from an outlet on the main porch, snaking through the grass and disappearing into the garage door crack. My stomach dropped. My dad was a stickler for safety. He would never run a cord like that. It was a trip hazard and a fire risk. I changed course, stepping off the porch and walking across the lawn toward the garage. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the yard. The temperature was dropping, typical for late October. It was maybe 50 degrees out, damp and chilling. I reached the side door of the garage and pushed it open. "Mom, Dad," I called out, my voice tight. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the usual scent of sawdust and motor oil that I associated with my dad's workshop. It smelled like stale food, unwashed laundry, and kerosene. I stepped inside, clicking on my flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a scene that made my knees lock up. The two cars that usually occupied the garage were gone, parked on the street around the corner to make room. In their place was a makeshift refugee camp. Boxes were stacked haphazardly against the walls, my parents' boxes. And there, in the center of the concrete floor, huddled around a small, dangerous-looking space heater, were my parents. The beam of my flashlight landed on my mother first. Maureen was sitting on a folding camping chair, wrapped in two knitted blankets, reading a paperback book by the dim light of a battery-operated lantern. My father, Arthur, was sitting on the edge of a narrow military-style cot, trying to fix the antenna on a small portable radio. They looked small. That was the only word for it. They looked diminished, like guests in their own existence. "Sadie," my mom squinted against the light, shielding her eyes. "Oh, honey, what are you doing here?" I lowered the flashlight, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What am I doing here? Mom, it's 50 degrees outside. Why are you in the garage?" I scanned the space. It was worse than I thought. A hot plate was set up on my dad's workbench next to a box of instant oatmeal. A bucket, a literal painter's bucket, sat in the corner with a roll of toilet paper on top of it. They didn't even have access to the bathroom. "It's just temporary," my dad said quickly, standing up. He looked tired. His gray hair was uncombed, and he was wearing his heavy winter coat inside. "Brendan needed the house for a networking event. Important people, you know how it is." "A networking event?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Dad, Emery posted that they moved in. She called it their forever home." My mom looked down at her hands. "Well, they're going through a hard time, Sadie. The lease on their condo, there was an issue. They needed a place to land. And the baby." "They don't have a baby, Mom," I snapped, perhaps too harshly. "Unless you mean the dog." "It's a very sensitive French bulldog," my dad mumbled, though he didn't look convinced. "Brendan says it has anxiety and can't be around old people smells." I stared at him. "He said that to you. He told you that you smell." "He's under a lot of stress," Mom interjected, always the peacemaker. "He's trying to get this new venture off the ground. He said if he can just impress these investors tonight, he'll be able to pay us back for everything. He just needed the space to look impressive. He said our furniture was a bit dated for the clientele." I looked at the cots. I looked at the extension cord powering the space heater, the only source of warmth in the uninsulated garage. "How long?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "How long have you been sleeping out here?" "Just since Saturday," Mom said. 3 days, I whispered. "You've been living in a concrete box for 3 days." "It's not so bad," Dad said, trying to force a smile. "Like camping. Remember when we used to go to the Poconos?" "We went to the Poconos in July, Dad, not October." I walked over to the workbench and touched the hot plate. It was cold. "Have you eaten dinner?" "We had sandwiches earlier," Mom said. "Brendan said he'd bring us some leftovers after the catering crew leaves. He didn't want us walking through the kitchen while they were plating the food. Presentation is key," he said. Rage is a funny thing. Usually it's hot. It burns you up. But this rage was ice cold. It clarified everything. I looked at the door leading from the garage into the main house. It was locked from the inside. "Give me your keys," I said. "Sadie, don't," Mom pleaded, standing up and dropping her blanket. "Please don't make a scene. He promised it's just for a little while. If you go in there and embarrass him in front of his friends, he'll never forgive us. He says he's finally turning a corner." "I'm not going to make a scene," I lied. "I just need to use the bathroom. I drove 30 minutes to get here." "Sadie." "I promise, Mom, I'll be quiet as a mouse." Dad sighed and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his keyring. He handed it to me with a trembling hand. "Please, honey, he's your brother." "I know," I said, closing my fingers around the cold metal keys. "That's exactly why I need to see this." I turned and walked to the side door of the garage, exiting back into the yard. The sun had fully set now. The windows of the main house were glowing with warm, golden light. I could hear laughter, rich, easy laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from people who aren't shivering in a garage. I walked to the back patio. The sliding glass door was curtained, but there was a gap. I peered in. The kitchen had been transformed. My mom's collection of ceramic roosters was gone. The counters were cleared of all clutter. A professional caterer was arranging hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. I moved to the mudroom door, inserted my key, and turned it silently. The lock clicked. I opened the door just a crack and slipped inside. The mudroom smelled of expensive cologne and roasted garlic. It was a nauseating combination compared to the stale air of the garage. I left my heavy boots by the door and moved in my socks, silent on the hardwood floors. I crept toward the hallway that connected the kitchen to the living room. The house was buzzing with activity. I counted maybe 15 people. Most of them were strangers, trendy tea. Ips in their 20s and 30s, holding wine glasses and admiring the crown molding. "The architecture is just classic," I heard a woman say. "You really scored with this place, Emery." "Oh, thank you," Emery's voice floated from the dining room. "It was a total gut job when we got it, honestly. You wouldn't believe the hoarding situation. We had to clear out so much junk just to make it livable." I gripped the doorframe. My parents weren't hoarders. They were sentimental. Every item in this house had a story, and Emery had just dismissed 40 years of family history as junk. I moved closer to the living room, staying in the shadows of the hallway. I spotted Brendan. He was standing by the fireplace, my father's fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. He was wearing a velvet blazer that I knew cost more than my parents' monthly Social Security check. He was talking to Dave. I knew Dave. Dave was Brendan's business partner, a guy who had never held a steady job but always had a new scheme involving crypto or NFTs. "I'm telling you, man, it's a game changer," Brendan was saying, gesturing with his glass. "Moving here freed up so much capital. No rent, no mortgage, just pure equity." "But what about the folks?" Dave asked, glancing around. "I thought you said they were around." Brendan laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, they're handled. I moved them into the ADU." "The what?" "Accessory dwelling unit," Brendan said smoothly. "Sounds fancy, right? It's the garage. Put some cots in there, told them it was a minimalist retreat. They bought it hook, line, and sinker. They're so desperate to help their successful son that they'll sleep on concrete if I tell them it's for the greater good." Dave snickered. "You're cold, man, living in the garage." "Hey, look around," Brendan said, spreading his arms wide. "I need this space to project the right image. I can't have Dad shuffling around in his bathrobe while I'm trying to close a deal. Besides, they're old. They don't need all this square footage. It's wasted on them. I'm doing them a favor, really. Downsizing is trendy." "So is the deed in your name?" Dave asked. Brendan took a sip of his scotch, a smirk playing on his lips. "Basically, Dad signed over power of attorney for the renovations last week. He thinks it's just for permits, but I've got Henderson drawing up the transfer papers. Once the market ticks up in the spring, I'm selling this place. Pocket the cash, put the old folks in a state home, and move us to Miami." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just mooching, he was planning to liquidate their entire existence. He was going to sell the house out from under them and dump them in a facility. I watched as Emery walked up to Brendan and kissed him on the cheek. "Babe, the caterer needs to know if we want to serve the fillets now or wait for the stragglers." "Serve them," Brendan said. "I'm starving." "What about your parents?" Emery asked, keeping her voice low. "Should we send a plate out?" Brendan waved his hand dismissively. "Throw some of the bruschetta in a Tupperware. They're fine. They're probably asleep by now anyway. Don't waste the steak on them. Their teeth probably can't handle it." They both laughed. I stepped back into the shadows. The urge to storm into that room and flip the table was overwhelming. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Brendan by his velvet lapels and throw him through the window. But I stopped myself. I looked at the walls. I noticed a hairline crack running above the doorframe that Brendan had clearly tried to paint over. I looked at the floor. They had removed a support pillar to open up the kitchen. The ceiling was sagging, just barely, but I saw it. I wasn't just a sister. I was a project manager. I knew building codes, I knew property law, and I knew exactly who to call. Screaming would feel good for 5 minutes, but destroying Brendan completely, that would last a lifetime. I pulled out my phone, silenced the camera shutter, and snapped a photo of Brendan raising his glass. Then I took a photo of the removed pillar. I turned around and slipped back out the mudroom door, silent as a ghost. I had work to do. I slipped back into the cold night air, the heavy door of the mudroom clicking shut behind me. The laughter from the party was muffled now, reduced to a low thrum against the siding. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline of restraint. I walked back to the garage, but I didn't go inside immediately. I needed to see the extent of the damage. Brendan had bragged about opening up the space, but in a house built in 1978, you don't just knock down walls because it looks good on Pinterest. I circled the perimeter of the house. I turned on my flashlight, shielding the beam with my hand to keep it focused low on the foundation. I found the first problem near the kitchen bumpout. A jagged, stair-step crack ran from the soil line up to the window frame. It was fresh. The edges were sharp, not weathered. "You idiot," I whispered. By removing that interior pillar I had seen earlier, Brendan had compromised the load path. The weight of the second floor, including the master bath with its heavy cast-iron tub, was now resting on a span that wasn't designed to hold it. The house was literally settling in real time. I moved to the electrical meter. The panel box was open. A nest of colorful wires bypassed the main breaker, feeding directly into the orange extension cord running to the garage. It was a masterclass in code violations. If the space heater in the garage surged, it wouldn't just trip a breaker. It could melt the insulation and ignite the siding. I took high-resolution photos of everything. The crack, the wiring, the sagging soffit above the kitchen window. I documented it with the cold precision of a forensic analyst. I finally entered the garage. My parents were eating the bruschetta, cold toast with soggy tomatoes, out of a plastic container. My dad had managed to get the radio working. Low jazz was playing. "Sadie," Mom said, wiping her mouth with a paper napkin. "Did you see him? Is he happy?" The question broke my heart. She wasn't worried about her frozen toes. She was worried about her son's happiness. "He's ecstatic, Mom," I said, forcing a gentle tone. "The party is a big hit." "Good," Dad said, nodding. "He needs a win. He's had a rough go." "Listen," I said, kneeling beside Mom's chair. "I have to head out. I have a project I need to start working on tonight, but I need you to promise me something. Do not plug anything else into that outlet. Just the heater. Nothing else. It's not safe." "You worry too much," Dad chuckled. "I wired this house myself." "I know, Dad, but Brendan messed with the panel." Dad's smile faded slightly. "He did." "Just promise me," I insisted. "Okay, honey, we promise." I kissed them both on the forehead. They smelled like kerosene and old wool. As I walked back to my truck, I didn't cry. I pulled up my contacts list and found the number for Elias. It was 9:30 p.m., but I knew he'd be awake. I sent a text, urgent. "I need you to pull the permits for 412 Oak Street, and I need you to meet me at the 24-hour diner on Main. Now." The City Limits Diner was a relic of the 90s, all neon lights and checkered floors. It was also the unofficial office of every insomniac contractor in the city. I was sitting in a corner booth, my laptop open, when Elias walked in. He was wearing a City of Columbus windbreaker and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Elias and I went back to college. We had survived Architecture 101 together before he realized he hated designing buildings and preferred regulating them. Now, he was a senior code enforcement officer. He carried a clipboard like a weapon. Sadie, he said, sliding into the booth opposite me. He didn't say hello. He just dropped a thick roll of paper on the table. You know 412 Oak is your parents' place, right? I know, I said, sliding a mug of black coffee toward him. Tell me what you found. Elias unrolled the papers. They were printouts of permit applications. All of them were stamped in big red letters, DNIED or incomplete. There are 3 active applications, Elias said, pointing a fry at the documents. One for a deck extension, one for a kitchen remodel, and one for a detached living space conversion. None of them were approved. The kitchen permit was rejected because the submitted drawings didn't account for the load-bearing wall on the north side. He took the wall out anyway, I said. Elias froze. He did what? I turned my laptop around and opened the photo gallery. I clicked on the picture of the open-concept kitchen, then the photo of the exterior crack. Elias leaned in, his eyes narrowing. He let out a low whistle. Sadie, look at the deflection in that ceiling beam. See that bow? That's at least 2 inches of sag. If there's a heavy snow load this winter, or if someone decides to put a heavy piece of furniture in the bedroom above. The roof comes down, I finished. Catastrophically, Elias agreed. And that wiring job, that's a Class A fire hazard. He's bypassed the safety ground. This isn't just a code violation, Sadie. This is criminal negligence. If I walked in there right now, I'd have to red tag the entire structure. Everyone out. Immediately. That's the plan, I said. But not yet. He's having a housewarming reveal party on Saturday, a big one. He invited half the town. Elias looked at me, understanding dawning on his face. You want me to crash the party? I want you to do your job, Elias. I want a full inspection. During the toast. Elias sat back, tapping his fingers on the table. You know, if I do that, the house becomes uninhabitable until it's fixed. Your parents. My parents are already living in the garage, I said, my voice hard. They have nowhere to go because he stole their home. I need. Ed him out so I can bring a crew in to fix it properly. But I need him out legally, and I need him out publicly. Elias looked at the photo of the crack again. He pulled a red pen from his pocket and circled the foundation damage on the printout. Saturday, Elias said. I'll bring the whole team. Electrical, structural, and zoning. We'll light that place up like a Christmas tree. The next morning at 8:00 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in the leather armchair of Mr. Henderson's office. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Mr. Henderson had been my father's lawyer for 30 years. He was a man who still used a fountain pen and believed in wearing a 3-piece suit to the grocery store. Sadie, he said, peering over his spectacles. It's good to see you, though I wish the circumstances were better. Your father called me last week. He sounded confused. Brendan told his friends that Dad signed over power of attorney, I said, cutting to the chase. He says he's transferring the deed. Mr. Henderson let out a dry, rattling laugh. Brendan says a lot of things. Usually, none of them are true. He opened a thick file folder on his desk. Your father did sign a document. Brendan brought it to him. It was a standard caregiver agreement. Brendan downloaded it off the internet, likely thinking it was a shortcut to guardianship. What does it say? Well, Henderson smiled, a mischievous glint in his eye. Brendan made a classic amateur mistake. He didn't read the boilerplate text. He just filled in the blanks and had Arthur sign it. The agreement designates Brendan as a live-in caregiver. It grants him the right to reside on the property in exchange for providing daily care. Henderson slid the document across the mahogany desk. He pointed to Clause 14, Section B. Read that. I looked at the small print. The caregiver shall not make any permanent alterations, structural changes, or cosmetic modifications to the property without the express written consent of the homeowner. Any unauthorized alterations shall be grounds for immediate termination of this agreement, and the caregiver shall be liable for the full cost of restoration. And this, Henderson said, pointing to Clause 19. The caregiver agrees to reside in the designated guest quarters. The primary suite is reserved for the homeowner. Failure to adhere to these boundaries constitutes a breach of contract. He's sleeping in the master bedroom, I said, a smile finally tugging at the corners of my mouth. And my parents are in the garage. Then he is in breach, Henderson said, slamming the folder shut. And since this is a contract for services, not a tenancy agreement, he doesn't have tenant rights. If he breaches the contract, his license to occupy the property is revoked. Immediately. What about the power of attorney? He doesn't have it, Henderson said flatly. Your father signed a limited power of attorney that only authorizes Brendan to pick up mail and sign for packages. It explicitly forbids real estate transactions. I drafted that one myself 5 years ago to protect Arthur from exactly this. I sat back, the tension in my shoulders finally releasing. Brendan thought he was playing 4D chess, but he was actually playing checkers with pieces he'd already swallowed. So, I said, if the house is declared unsafe due to his unauthorized renovations, he is liable for the damages, Henderson confirmed. And since he claimed residency under false pretenses, we can charge him back rent for every day he occupied the premises. Market rate. Draft the eviction notice, I said, standing up, and calculate the bill. I'm delivering it on Saturday. At the party, Henderson asked, raising an eyebrow. At the party, I confirmed, it's time for the big reveal. The art of war teaches that if your enemy is arrogant, you should encourage his arrogance. You don't interrupt him when he's making a mistake. You hand him a microphone. On Thursday evening, 2 days before the party, I pulled into my parents' driveway again. This time, I didn't park on the street. I pulled right up behind Brendan's X5. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had swapped my work boots and Carhartt jacket for a soft cashmere sweater and heels. I applied a layer of lip gloss. I looked harmless. I looked like a sister who had accepted defeat. I walked to the front door, carrying a bottle of Dom Perignon. It was an investment prop. Emery answered the door. She looked surprised, scanning my outfit with a critical eye before relaxing. Sadie, we didn't know you were coming by. I just wanted to drop this off, I said, holding out the bottle. For the party, and I wanted to apologize for being weird the other night. I was just shocked by the changes, that's all. I've had time to think about it, and you guys are right. The house needed an update. Emery's face lit up. Validation was her drug of choice. Oh my go. Dee, thank you. I told Brendan you'd come around. It's just so much more modern now, isn't it? It's definitely open, I said, stepping inside. Brendan was in the kitchen, or what used to be the kitchen. He was leaning against the new quartz island, scrolling on his phone. When he saw me, he straightened up, ready for a fight. Peace offering, I said, gesturing to the wine Emery was holding. The place looks incredible, Brendan. I mean, really ambitious. Brendan smirked, his shoulders dropping. See, I told you, you just lack vision, Sadie. You're too stuck in the rules. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs. Or walls, I added with a smile. Speaking of which, how did you get the permit for this span so fast? I usually have to wait 6 weeks for the city to approve a beam calculation like this. Brendan laughed, pouring himself a glass of water from the new fridge. Permits? Please, that's just the government trying to slow down innovation. I have a buddy who knows a guy. We bypass the paperwork. As long as it looks good, who cares what's behind the drywall, right? I kept my smile frozen in place. My phone, tucked into my purse with the voice memo app running, caught every word. That's smart, I said, leaning against the counter. I could feel the floor vibrate slightly as Emery walked past in her heels. The joists were already struggling. So, the party on Saturday, is it just family? God no, Brendan scoffed. We invited the whole neighborhood. My investors, some local influencers, Dave's crypto group. We need to make a splash. This house is the asset that's going to leverage my next loan. I need people to see the value. Well, I'll be there, I promised. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Make sure you dress up, Emery called out from the living room. "We're hiring a photographer." "Oh, don't worry," I said, glancing at the hairline crack that had grown an inch since Tuesday. "It's going to be a night to remember." I excused myself to use the restroom, but instead, I ducked out the side door to the garage. My parents were there, playing cards on top of a packing crate. "Sadie," Dad asked, looking up. "Listen to me," I whispered urgently. "On Saturday night at exactly 8:30 p.m., I want you both to go for a walk. Go to the diner down the street. Order pie. Do not be here." "Why?" Mom asked, worried. "Because the roof is about to come down," I said. "Metaphorically speaking, just trust me, be gone." Saturday night arrived with the kind of aggressive fanfare only the deeply insecure can muster. Brendan had rented a red carpet. A literal red carpet ran from the driveway to the front porch. Valets were parking cars, mostly leased luxury sedans, up and down the quiet suburban street. Bass-heavy house music shook the windows, vibrating the glass that my father had carefully caulked 20 years ago. I arrived at 8:00 p.m. I wore a black dress, sharp and severe. I wasn't there to celebrate, I was there to witness a funeral. Inside, the house was unrecognizable. The furniture was white leather, rented for the night. The lighting was dim and purple, hiding the imperfections in the drywall finish. About 50 people were crammed into the open-concept living area. I navigated the crowd, holding a glass of sparkling water. I saw people I recognized from high school, people who used to ignore Brendan, now listening to him with rapt attention as he gestured wildly. "It's all about asset utilization," Brendan was shouting over the music. He was wearing a tuxedo jacket with jeans. "My parents were just sitting on this equity, doing nothing. I unlocked it." I looked at the floor. With 50 people moving around, the vibration was undeniable now. The floorboards were groaning under the weight. The removal of that load-bearing wall was making the second floor sag like a wet hammock. I checked my watch, 8:15 p.m. I found Emery in the kitchen. She was posing for a photo with 3 women who looked identical to her. "Sadie," she squealed, grabbing my arm. "Isn't this amazing? Dave says the house is easily worth double what Arthur paid for it." "It's certainly something," I said. "Where are Mom and Dad?" "Oh, I think they went for a walk," Emery said with a dismissive wave. "I told them they could come in for a bit, but they said they felt underdressed. Can you believe that? I even offered to lend Maureen a scarf." "They went for a walk," I repeated, relief washing over me. They were clear. "Hey," Brendan yelled, climbing onto a sturdy oak chair in the center of the room. He clinked a spoon against his glass. "Everyone, listen up." The music lowered slightly. The crowd turned toward him. "I just want to thank you all for coming to the unveiling of the estate," Brendan announced, beaming. "It's been a lot of hard work, a lot of vision. A lot of people said I couldn't do it. They said, 'Brendan, you can't just take over a house and reinvent it.' But look around. This is what hap. NS when you have the guts to seize what's yours." The crowd cheered. Dave raised a fist. "I want to propose a toast," Brendan shouted, raising his glass high. "To new management and to the future." "To the future," the crowd echoed. As they drank, I felt a heavy thud. It wasn't the music. It was the front door slamming open. The room went quiet, rippling from the entryway inward. The silence spread like a contagion until it reached Brendan on his chair. Standing in the foyer was Elias. He was flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and the fire marshal, who was wearing full turnout gear. Elias wasn't holding a drink. He was holding a stack of neon orange stickers and a sledgehammer. "Turn the music off," Elias boomed. His voice didn't need a microphone, it was the voice of authority. Someone scrambled to kill the stereo. The silence that followed was deafening. "Who are you?" Brendan demanded, stepping down from the chair. He looked annoyed, not scared. He thought it was a noise complaint. "Look, officer, if the neighbors complained, we can turn the bass down. I know my rights." "I'm not the police," Elias said, stepping into the living room. He didn't look at the guests. He looked at the ceiling. "I'm the chief code enforcement officer for the city. And right now, you have about 5 minutes to evacuate this building before I arrest you for criminal endangerment. The color drained from Brendan's face. Excuse me. You removed a load-bearing partition wall at grid line 4, Elias said, pointing a laser measure at the sagging beam above Brendan's head. You severed the grounding wire to the main panel. You have unpermitted electrical work running into a detached structure. Elias turned to the fire marshal. Captain. The marshal nodded grimly. We're at capacity. With that compromised ceiling span, this is a mass casualty event waiting to happen. Clear the room, now. This is bullshit, Brendan screamed, his tuxedo jacket flapping. You can't do this. This is my house. I have permits. No, Elias said, pulling a folded paper from his clipboard. You have applications that were denied, and you have a fake contractor license number on the paperwork you tried to file yesterday. That's fraud, Brendan. The guests began to murmur. People started backing away from Brendan, moving toward the door. The influencers stopped recording. Everyone out, the police officer shouted. Move, this is not a drill. The stampede was immediate. The friends who had been drinking Brendan's wine didn't hesitate to abandon him. They grabbed their purses and fled, terrified of being crushed by the ceiling. Brendan stood alone in the center of the room as his party evaporated. Emery was cowering by the fridge, clutching her pearls. I walked out of the shadows. I stood next to Elias. Sadie, Brendan looked at me, his eyes wide and wild. Sadie, tell them Dad said it was okay. Tell them I'm the owner. I took a step forward. I didn't yell. I spoke with the calm, flat affect of a project manager delivering a termination notice. You're not the owner, Brendan. You're the caregiver. I reached into my purse, not for a phone, but for the document Mr. Henderson had prepared. I slapped it onto the white leather ottoman. And you just violated every single clause of your contract. Elias walked over to the beautiful bay window, the one Emery had posted on Instagram. He slapped a massive, impossible-to-remove orange sticker onto the glass. Unsafe for human occupancy. Do not enter, by order of the city. The house is condemned until structural repairs are made, Elias said, looking at Brendan with pure disdain. That means nobody sleeps here tonight. Not you, not your wife. But where will we go? Emery whispered, her voice trembling. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I hear the garage has a heater. Oh, wait. Elias just cut the power to that, too. The silence in the living room was heavier than the load-bearing wall Brendan had removed. The thumping bass was gone, replaced by the crackle of police radios and the frantic clicking of Emery's heels as she paced back and forth on the hardwood. The guests had scattered like roaches when the lights turned on, leaving behind half-drunk glasses of wine and plates of cold appetizers. Brendan stood alone near the fireplace, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked small. The tuxedo jacket that had seemed so dashing an hour ago now looked like a costume. This is a mistake, Brendan stammered, his eyes darting between Elias and the police officers. I have rights, squatters' rights. I've been here for 30 days. You've been here for 26 days, I corrected, stepping forward. I opened the file folder Mr. Henderson had prepared. And you aren't a squatter, you're a contractor, a bad one. I handed him the document. This is the agreement you made Dad sign. You remember, the one you told him was just for the mail. Brenda. N snatched the paper. So what? It says I live here. Read Clause 14, I said, my voice cutting through the room. And Clause 19. You signed a contract agreeing to provide care in exchange for lodging in the detached unit. By moving into the main house and altering the structure without written consent, you voided the contract. Brendan's eyes scanned the page. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. Since the contract is void, I continued, you are no longer a guest. You are a trespasser. And since you occupied the primary residence illegally, you are liable for fair market rent for the duration of your stay. In this zip code, for a 4-bedroom house, that's about $4,000. I don't have $4,000, Brendan spat. Oh, I'm not done, I said, pulling out the second sheet of paper, the estimate I had drawn up based on the photos. You also owe for the remediation of the unauthorized structural changes. The new beam, the jack posts to shore up the second floor, the electrical rewiring, the permit fines. It comes to roughly $42,000. Emery stopped pacing. She looked at Brendan, her eyes wide with horror. Brendan, you said we had equity. You said the loan came through. I was working on it, Brendan yelled, his facade cracking. I just needed the house to show collateral. He doesn't have the deed, Emery, I said softly. He never did. He has a piece of paper that says he's the gardener, and he just got fired. Mr. Henderson had been thorough. The document also contained a confession of judgment clause, meaning if Brendan violated the terms, the debt was immediately enforceable. You have two choices, I told my brother. You can leave right now, voluntarily, and we work out a payment plan for the damages. Or the officers here can arrest you for elder abuse, fraud, and criminal mischief. The jail cells are very small, Brendan, and they definitely don't have crown molding. Brendan looked at the police officer, who had his hand resting casually near his belt. He looked at Elias, who was writing up a citation. He looked at the house he had tried to steal. We're leaving, he whispered. The departure was not the triumphant exit Brendan had probably imagined when he bought that tuxedo. It was a scramble. Because the house was now officially a crime scene of code violations, Elias wouldn't let them go back upstairs to pack their bags. Safety hazard, Elias said, crossing his arms. The floor joists under the master bedroom are compromised. No one goes up there until I have a structural engineer sign off. You leave with what's on your back. But my jewelry, Emery shrieked. My laptop. We'll bag it and tag it, the officer said boredly. You can pick it up at the station on Monday once the building is secured. Right now, you need to vacate the premises. I watched from the foyer as they grabbed their coats. Brendan tried to pick up a case of leftover wine. Leave it, I said. That was bought with Mom's credit card, wasn't it? Brendan froze. He didn't answer. He just set the box down. They walked out the front door, past the red unsafe. Sticker Elias had slapped on the glass. The red carpet Brendan had rented was already damp with night dew. I followed them onto the porch. The cool air felt clean, purging the smell of Brendan's cologne from my nose. They walked to the BMW. Brendan fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. Where are we supposed to go? He asked, not looking at me. We gave up the condo. I hear Dave has a pull-out couch, I said. Or maybe you can stay at a hotel, but I'd hurry. Once the bank finds out you don't have this asset to back your business loan, that credit card might stop working. Emery was already in the passenger seat, sobbing. She wasn't crying for my parents. She wasn't crying for the damage. She was crying because the illusion was over. Brendan got into the car. He slammed the door. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't ask about Mom and Dad. He just peeled out of the driveway, his tires screeching on the asphalt, speeding away into the dark. I watched his taillights disappear. He's gone, Elias said, stepping up beside me. He stripped off the orange vest. The house is secured. I've got a crew coming first thing Monday to shore up that ceiling. We can save the house, Sadie. Thank you, Elias, I said, leaning against the porch railing. Send me the bill, every penny. Don't worry, Elias smiled. We'll tack it onto the lien against his future earnings. You just go get your parents. I got into my truck and drove to the diner. When I walked in, Mom and Dad were sitting in a booth, sharing a slice of cherry pie. They looked anxious, holding hands across the table. It's over, I told them, sliding into the booth. He's gone, the house is. Well, it's going to need some work, but it's yours again. Dad let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. Mom wiped a tear fr. Her cheek. Is he okay? She asked. Even after everything, she was still a mother. He's alive, I said. And for the first time in his life, he's going to have to figure it out himself. I took them back to my place that night. They slept in my guest room in a real bed with the heat on. For the first time in weeks, they slept soundly. 3 months later, the smell of sawdust had finally been replaced by the scent of fresh coffee and blooming lilacs. I sat on the front porch swing next to my dad. It was a crisp Saturday morning in April. The grass was green again. I had fixed the sprinkler system myself. The bay window sparkled in the sunlight, the orange sticker long gone. The last 3 months had been a whirlwind of contractors, dust, and legal paperwork. We had to install a steel I-beam to replace the wall Brendan had knocked down. It cost a fortune, but we made the house stronger than it was before. Brendan was currently living in a studio apartment on the other side of town, working a sales job to pay off the garnishment on his wages. Emery had left him 2 weeks after the eviction. Apparently, her love was conditional on square footage. Mom walked out onto the porch carrying a tray with 3 mugs. She looked 10 years younger. The dark circles under her eyes were gone. "The new kitchen paint looks lovely, Sadie," she said, handing me a mug. "I'm glad we went with the sage green." "It's calming," I agreed. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the birds. "I never thought he would do that," Dad said quietly, staring at the driveway. "I always thought, family helps family." "Family does help family," I said, squeezing his hand. "That's why I'm here. That's why we fixed this. But sometimes, Dad, helping someone means stopping them from destroying you." Dad nodded slowly. "I read the contract again, the one Henderson wrote. I didn't realize it protected us so well. I just thought it was paperwork." "It was a shield," I said, "and thank God you had it." We drank our coffee. The house stood solid behind us, a testament to resilience. We had stripped away the rot, reinforced the foundation, and reclaimed the space. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a fortress.